In 1849 and 50 and 52, he was sent to California. He moved around to all of these military bases. And he was at Fort Humboldt, California from 1853 to 1854. That's a long way from St. Louis. And apparently there are numerous stories and accounts that he often became lonesome, he became fatigued, he became bored, and he did a bit of drinking. That was okay until an officer by the name of Robert Buchanan came to Fort Humboldt. Robert Buchanan was from a teetotaling family, did not like drinking, and so he and Grant became rivals, became sort of bitter enemies. And on one occasion, Colonel Buchanan found Grant on duty drinking. In the military, that's a fairly serious offense. Grant was caught by Robert Buchanan, intoxicated on duty, and he threatened to fire or demote Grant. Grant pledged to him that he would not do it again. He said, if I ever do it again, you can court-martial me. And it wasn't long until Buchanan caught Grant again intoxicated on duty. And he gave Grant a choice. You will be court-martialed or you can resign from the service. Thus, in 1854, Ulysses S. Grant resigned from the military under duress from his supervising officer. Grant then moved back to St. Louis, where his wife and children were, and from 1854 to 1861 had a very difficult time, but just barely. He sold firewood on the streets of St. Louis to make a living, and eventually in 1858 and 59 he moved up to Galena, Illinois, where his father had started a leather shop, a tanning shop. Washburn, passing information on from Henry Halleck in Washington, D.C., directed Ulysses Grant to go to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and assume command of all of the available men, organize them, train them, and then move to Columbus, Kentucky, up on the bluffs to seize control of the Mississippi River so that the Confederates could not launch an attack into Missouri. Benjamin Prentiss was up in the Ironton, Missouri area. And he had all of the men up there who had been in the military, and they were supposed to protect the railroad that went into Pilot Knob and thence on to St. Louis. They wanted uniforms. The war was underway, and they had a desire for some uniforms, but there were no uniforms available immediately. And so Prentiss contacted someone who was over at the state penitentiary in Jefferson City, and they had some surplus prisoner uniforms, black and white striped. Prentiss gave those uniforms to his men, and in August of 1861, he moved that contingent of men down from Ironton towards Cape Girardeau. They walked all of the way dressed in black and white striped uniforms, which must have been a sight for all of the residents of the farms between Ironton and Cape Girardeau. They came down from Ironton to Jackson. Prentiss led them here to this region. Ulysses S. Grant came down from St. Louis on a riverboat by the Mississippi. Strangely, both men, both brigadier generals, both with the same orders, arrived in this area on the same day. Benjamin Prentiss arrived in Jackson, left his men camped there on the south edge of Jackson, and then one morning he got all of his aides, his staff, and they came into Cape Girardeau because he had heard that Ulysses Grant was in Cape Girardeau. So he was going to incorporate Grant into his command, give him directions, and have Grant help him move to Columbus, Kentucky.